But here in Washington, there is a dire warning from Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen to congressional leaders that the United States is expected to hit its borrowing limit as early as Thursday, in 2 days. That would force the Treasury Department, she says, to take extraordinary measures to keep paying its bills and to prevent a default until early June. Yellen urging lawmakers to act quickly to raise the debt ceiling and, quote, protect the full faith and credit of the country. But it likely will not be that simple. Republicans, of course, now in control of the House and have threatened to use the debt ceiling as leverage to demand spending cuts from Democrats and from the Biden administration. Let's bring in NBC News senior political reporter Sahil Kapoor, who joins us just across the street on Capitol Hill. Sahil, it's good to see you this morning. How close do you think we're going to come here to just violating this thing that used to just be sort of pro forma, that they would raise the debt ceiling and move on, but now is being used as a bargaining chip? And what deals might Speaker McCarthy have made to become Speaker that could affect the process here?
Willie, that is one of the most important questions on Capitol Hill this year. Just how close to the brink will Congress come? Because House Republicans are on a collision course with President Biden on the issue of the debt ceiling. They insist they will not raise it cleanly when the deadline comes up in early June. They want conservative policy provisions attached to it. And this push is being led by many of the same 15 to 20 House Republicans who forced 14 embarrassing defeats for Speaker McCarthy before finally electing him to the job. You know they're willing to use aggressive tactics just based on how they've behaved so far. Look on the screen there. These are some of the things that they've told me that they want. Some of these members say that they want attached to any increase in the debt limit, dollar-for-dollar spending cuts, a 10-year balanced budget, cuts to the mandatory spending pile of the budget. That includes things like Social Security, Medicare, and food stamps, as well as government funding down to fiscal 2022 levels before the previous government funding deal. One of those Republicans, Congressman Chip Roy of Texas, told me, quote, "You only have so many leverage and negotiating points. The debt ceiling is one of those," unquote. Now, Speaker McCarthy himself has not issued a specific list of demands as to what he wants attached to the debt ceiling, but he has endorsed this tactic generally and said President Biden needs to come to the table, negotiate some changes to the federal budget. He compared the U.S. government to a child with a credit card limit that needs to be reduced, and he said he's not budging. Now, the White House says none of this is going to happen. Their position is no negotiations. They point out that this is not about policy. This is simply about whether the U.S. government pays its bills, and that to them is not something that they're going to negotiate on. Let's play what spokeswoman Karine Jean-Pierre had to say.
It has been done in a bipartisan way over the years and decades, and it should be done in a bipartisan way, and it should be done without conditions. We're not going to do any negotiations, and it should be again done without conditions.
Now, that position is backed by the top two Democrats in Congress, Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, who said in a recent letter, quote, "Default forced by extreme MAGA Republicans could plunge the country into a deep recession," unquote. Now, there is one idea that is being talked about a lot in Washington as well as on Wall Street as a way to get around Speaker McCarthy and these conservatives, this idea of a so-called discharge petition, where technically if 218 lawmakers in the House sign it, it has to get to a floor vote regardless of what the Speaker wants. There is a major caveat, though. This would take a long time, 37 legislative days, which I did the math last night. That gets us to mid-May. If they want to do that, they better start very quickly, get a deal in the next few weeks. Otherwise, they're going to be dealing with Speaker McCarthy and these House Republican hardliners in terms of whether and when the country raises the debt ceiling. Willie.
And as of now, they only have 2 days, not those 37. NBC's Sahil Kapoor, thanks so much for reporting from Capitol Hill. Joe, so this will be the question. What did Speaker McCarthy, and it's something we talked about during that process a couple of weeks ago, what did he give up? What did he promise to some of those members to get their votes in terms of promises about cutting spending, about going after the debt that could hold up this process?
Right. It's a great question. The Wall Street Journal asking questions also about how the Republicans are going to handle this, talking about the fact that, the hard reality of a debt ceiling showdown, Democrats control the White House. Democrats control the Senate. Republicans have a slim 5-vote majority in the House of Representatives. And chances are good, as the Wall Street Journal says, the worst result would be for Republicans to talk tough for months, only to splinter in a rout in the end, and turn the House floor over to Democrats to raise the debt ceiling. The fact is, Willie, that It's one thing for these House Republicans, who, by the way, never protested while Donald Trump was raising the deficit and the federal debt to record levels every year. Let me say this again. These Republicans, when they ran Congress, went along for the ride in the largest expansion of the federal debt and the deficit in 2017 and 2018 and 2019 and 2020. They never said a word when Donald Trump was president of the United States. Suddenly, they want to wreck the economy because the Democrats in the White House? I mean, this is a lot like when George W. Bush was president. The deficit exploded because apparently Republicans only care about deficits when Democrats are in the White House. But all these people that are being self-righteous and talking about the end of America's economy, they were completely silent as Donald Trump was spending. And the impact, and we've talked about this before, the impact on the U.S. economy could be devastating. It's one thing if you turn the House floor over to extremists in the selection of a House Speaker and let 5, 6, 7 people who are far outside the mainstream of American political thought and economic thought run that. But here, what are the consequences if the United States default? We showed it before. We probably should show it again, TJ. You obviously have, as Janet Yellen has said, you obviously have America's full faith and credit put on the line if this default moves forward, or as we're starting to hear, if you even threaten a default. And what does that mean? That means interest rates are going to explode. That means the cost of housing is going to explode. Americans could lose 3 million jobs. Middle-class Americans, working-class Americans, upper-middle-class Americans, you listen too. If you got 401ks, they could be shredded. If there's a default or even the threat of a default. 30-year mortgages could cost an additional $130,000 because of MAGA extremists, because of 5, 6, 7 people that are actually threatening default in the United States economy. Borrowing across the board explodes. Price tag for everyday items explodes. And the U.S. national debt, which Republicans sat by and let Donald Trump take to record levels, could increase by $850 billion. So the question, Mika, really is Kevin McCarthy really going to play chicken with the U.S. economy, with American workers, with their retirement accounts? Because I've seen this play out before. I've seen it play out before time and time again. At the end of the day, small groups of extremists always get run over because it's not going to be leftists that are against a default. It's going to be small business owners who can't afford the loans going up, that can't afford their costs going up. It's going to be entrepreneurs. It's going to be business owners. It's going to be a lot of Republican contributors who are going to be the first to say to Kevin McCarthy, Kevin, let's not be crazy here. Let's not wreck the United States economy. And so then what happens? Does he play this out and then, as the Wall Street Journal says, and then folds at the end? My guess is that's exactly what he does.
Well, especially if the crazy caucus holds him to something that he, has no choice or he'll get kicked out. Remember the rules that he agreed to.
Right.
He's in a bad position.
There is no reason why Joe Biden or Democrats in the Senate or Democrats in the House should negotiate with 5, 6, 7 extremists.
Exactly.
And they're not going to. So this is really up to Kevin McCarthy. Does he want to wreck the economy? Or does he want to go ahead and try to work out a deal now?
Let's go look.